Let me ask you something. When you picture an interrogation, what do you see? A dark room, a single light hanging from the ceiling, someone pounding the table yelling, "Tell me the truth." That's what movies show you. That's what TV has sold you. But that's not how the real world works. In reality, the most powerful interrogator in the room isn't the one who shouts the loudest. It's the one who listens the best. You see, interrogation isn't about intimidation. It's not about control. It's about connection. Movies make it look like breaking someone down is the goal, but in truth, the real goal is to build something trust. Because without trust, you get lies, not truth. You get compliance, not cooperation. Here's what most people don't realize when someone sits across from you, whether it's in an interrogation room, a meeting, or a personal conversation, they're constantly reading you. They're asking themselves, can I trust this person? Are they safe? Are they judging me? And the moment they sense aggression or ego, their defenses go up. You lose them. So the real art of interrogation is not about forcing the truth. It's about inviting it. It's psychological, emotional, human. It's reading the micro expressions, noticing the subtle changes in tone, body language, and energy. It's creating an environment where the other person feels safe enough to speak, and then using silence as your sharpest tool. That's another thing movies never get right. Silence. They fill every second with shouting, slamming, and sound. But in the real world, silence is where the truth starts to leak out, because silence makes people uncomfortable. And when people get uncomfortable, they fill the space with words, with explanations, sometimes with the truth they didn't plan to reveal. Here's the truth. Good interrogators aren't hunters. They're mirrors. They reflect back calm, empathy, control. They let the other person see themselves, and often that's what cracks them open. So the next time you watch one of those Hollywood interrogations, remember this: real strength isn't in the scream, it's in the stillness. Real control isn't in the threat, it's in the patience. And real truth, it doesn't come from fear, it comes from understanding. That's what movies get wrong. And that's what real interrogation and real human communication gets right. When most people hear the word interrogation, their minds immediately jump to the dramatic scenes they've seen in movies, the slamming fists, the raised voices, the glaring lights, and the desperate confessions. Hollywood has done an excellent job of entertaining us, but a terrible job of educating us about how truth is actually found. Because in the real world, interrogation isn't about domination or fear. It's not about power plays or intimidation tactics. It's about one human being connecting with another on the most fundamental psychological level. Real interrogation is about connection, not control. The biggest misconception people have is that the louder you are, the more authority you have. But yelling doesn't make people tell the truth. It makes them shut down. When someone feels threatened, their brain goes into survival mode. Their body floods with adrenaline, and all logical thought disappears. They aren't thinking about honesty. They're thinking about self-protection. They'll say whatever it takes to escape the pressure, even if it's not true. So when an interrogator uses aggression, they don't get closer to the truth. They push it further away. The power of a true professional lies in emotional intelligence. It's about reading the room, understanding human behavior, and controlling the energy of the conversation without making the other person feel controlled. A skilled interrogator doesn't dominate the space. They guide it. They stay calm, steady, and composed. Because the moment you lose your calm, you lose control. People mirror what they see. If you're angry, they'll get defensive. If you're composed, they'll slowly let their guard down. The foundation of every successful interrogation is trust. That might sound strange when you think of a setting where one person is being questioned by another, but trust doesn't always mean friendship or comfort. It means creating an environment where the other person feels understood enough to speak. The human mind has a natural resistance to vulnerability, especially under pressure. People don't share what they feel unless they believe someone will actually listen, not judge, not react, not condemn. That's why the best interrogators act less like enemies and more like observers. They use empathy as a strategy. Empathy doesn't mean weakness. It means awareness. It's the ability to put yourself in someone's mental and emotional space to understand their motives. Every person has a reason for what they do, even if it's a bad one. The interrogator's job is to find that reason. You can't do that through intimidation. You do it through curiosity, patience, and emotional control. When you genuinely want to understand someone, they can feel it. And when they feel it, the walls start to crumble. There's a deep psychological principle at play here. People respond to the energy you give them. If you project dominance, they'll resist. If you project understanding, they'll engage. Most people, even those who lie or hide things, still crave to be seen and heard. The simple act of listening, truly listening, disarms people faster than any aggressive tactic ever could. The moment someone realizes you're not there to humiliate them, but to understand them, they begin to open up. They start to talk. And talking leads to truth. Control in an interrogation room isn't about force. It's about emotional direction. You steer the conversation without the other person realizing it. You do this by observing, by staying present, and by asking the right questions at the right time. You don't rush the process. You don't demand answers. You create conditions where the truth becomes the natural outcome of the dialogue. The best interrogators know how to control themselves first, their tone, their breathing, their reactions. Because if you can't control yourself, you can't control the room. Human beings are wired for connection. From childhood, we're taught to respond to tone, body language, and emotional cues. Even in a high-stress situation, that wiring doesn't disappear. People can feel authenticity. They can sense when someone is faking compassion or trying too hard to manipulate them. That's why authenticity matters. The person being interrogated may not like you, but they should respect you. They should feel that your interest in them is real, not performative. When that happens, they stop seeing you as the enemy and start seeing you as someone they can engage with. In that space, connection begins. It's subtle, fragile, and often built one small response at a time. It could be through shared understanding, a calm tone, or a non-judgmental reaction to something they reveal. Those moments accumulate until the other person starts to feel safe enough to tell the truth. That's where the real work happens. That's where the breakthrough begins. It's not in the shouting or the threats. It's in the quiet exchange of trust between two minds. Think of it like this. Control tries to force truth out. Connection draws it out. Control triggers fear. Connection triggers honesty. When you try to dominate someone psychologically, you activate their defense systems, and defense systems are designed to protect, not reveal. But when you connect, you activate their need to be understood. People want their stories heard. They want to justify themselves. They want someone to understand their perspective, even if it's flawed. And once they start explaining, once they start telling their story, that's where you find the details that lead to truth. So the best interrogators don't act like warriors. They act like psychologists. They use calm presence as their weapon. They use silence as their strategy. They create emotional conditions where truth feels easier to give than to hide It's not manipulation, it's human understanding at its highest level. The goal isn't to break someone down, it's to break through the layers they've built around their truth. Connection is what turns confrontation into communication. It's what transforms a battle of wills into a moment of revelation. And it all starts with understanding that real power isn't about control, it's about influence. You don't get people to talk by forcing them. You get them to talk by making them want to. And that only happens when they feel seen, heard, and understood. Silence and empathy reveal more truth than force ever will. That statement sounds simple, but it holds the essence of what separates real understanding from manipulation. In a world that glorifies dominance and control, silence and empathy are often mistaken for weakness, yet in the hands of someone skilled in human behavior, they become the most powerful tools for uncovering truth. Most people think communication is about what we say, but in reality, it's about what we allow to be said, and silence is the invitation for honesty. When you strip away all the noise, you realize that silence is not the absence of communication, it's the amplifier of it. In a room where emotions run high, words lose their weight. People say things to defend themselves, to buy time, to avoid vulnerability. But when you introduce silence, everything changes. The atmosphere shifts. The person sitting across from you begins to feel the pressure of their own thoughts. Silence makes people uncomfortable because it removes the escape of distraction. It forces them to sit with what they know and what they've done. And in that discomfort, truth starts to surface. A skilled listener uses silence deliberately. They don't rush to fill every gap. They let pauses breathe. They know that after a difficult question, the real answer often comes as after the silence. The first response might be rehearsed, defensive, or incomplete, but when the quiet lingers, the mask starts to slip. People fill that space with justifications, explanations, or the small cracks that reveal what's really going on. It's in those cracks that truth hides. Empathy works hand in hand with silence. It's what gives silence its shape and direction. Without empathy, silence can feel like a trap. With empathy, it feels like safety. Empathy is the emotional bridge that tells someone, you can speak and I will understand. It's not about agreeing with them. It's about giving them the psychological permission to be honest. That's why empathy isn't softness, it's strategy. It's understanding human behavior deeply enough to know that people only open up when they believe they won't be attacked for doing so. In any conversation, there's a hidden battle taking place, the battle between ego and truth. Force feeds the ego. It says, I'm in charge. I'll make you tell me what I want to know. But empathy dissolves ego. It removes the need to defend. It makes people feel seen instead of judged. And when people feel seen, they stop hiding behind the armor of lies. They stop rehearsing their stories and start revealing their realities. You can't bully someone into honesty. You can only make honesty feel like the easier path. The psychology behind this is simple yet profound. The human brain reacts to threat by activating the fight or flight response. When someone feels attacked, their cognitive processing narrows. They stop thinking clearly. They focus only on survival, how to avoid pain, how to regain control, how to protect themselves. No one tells the truth in that state, but when empathy enters the picture, the brain begins to relax. The nervous system calms. The defensive barrier drops just enough for authentic thought to emerge. In that calm, truth becomes possible. People often confuse empathy with emotional attachment, but they're not the same. Empathy is not about feeling sorry for someone. It's about understanding them objectively. It's the ability to step into their mindset without losing your own clarity. A professional uses empathy to map the other person's emotional terrain. where the guilt lies, where the fear lies, where the justification hides. Once you see that landscape, you know how to navigate it. You know when to stay silent, when to ask, and when to simply wait. That's how truth is drawn out piece by piece, word by word. There's a subtle power in allowing silence to do the work. People underestimate it because it doesn't look dramatic. There's no shouting, no confrontation, no tension in the traditional sense. But that's what makes it so effective. Silence removes conflict and replaces it with reflection. It creates a void that demands to be filled. Most people aren't comfortable with that void. They start to explain themselves to fill in the blanks they think you're seeing. And in trying to control the perception of truth, they accidentally reveal it. Empathy amplifies this effect. When someone feels that you're genuinely trying to understand them, not corner them, they begin to speak more freely. They test the water with small truths. They say something and watch your reaction. If your face stays calm, if your body language stays open, they go further. The conversation deepens. They stop filtering. They start confessing, not out of fear, but out of relief. They want to let go of what they've been holding. Empathy gives them that release. Force, on the other hand, traps people in their defenses. It becomes a game of resistance. The more you push, the harder they push back. Even if they break under pressure, what you get isn't truth, it's survival speech. It's whatever they think will end the discomfort. That's why aggressive tactics fail. They may produce words, but not meaning. They may produce answers, but not honesty. Silence and empathy, however, bypass the survival brain and tap into the conscience. They speak to the part of a person that wants to be truthful, but needs the right environment to do so. True communication is not about domination. It's about alignment. It's about bringing someone to a place where their internal truth aligns with what they say out loud. That alignment can't be forced. It can only be allowed. Silence allows it. Empathy nurtures it. Together, they create a space where honesty feels like a natural response instead of a demanded outcome. In high-stakes situations, silence and empathy become even more critical. When emotions are heightened, logic fades. If you meet intensity with intensity, you only create chaos. But if you meet intensity with calmness, it neutralizes. The tone of your voice, your breathing, your facial expressions, all of it communicates safety. You're telling the other person, without words, that this space is not for battle, but for truth. That's the unspoken power of presence. The best communicators understand that silence and empathy are not passive. They are deliberate acts of control. They control the tempo, the tone, and the energy of the exchange. They slow down the pace so that real emotion can surface. They make space for the truth to emerge instead of trying to drag it out. They let people reveal themselves rather than forcing revelation upon them. When silence is paired with genuine empathy, it becomes magnetic. It draws people in, makes them lean forward, makes them trust the process. It transforms the atmosphere from confrontation to confession, and in that stillness, when the noise fades and the walls come down, that's where the truth finally finds its voice. The strongest interrogators listen more than they speak. It sounds simple, but it's one of the hardest skills to master because most people are conditioned to do the opposite. We live in a world that rewards talking, explaining, and asserting dominance. Silence feels like weakness. Listening feels like passivity. Yet in the real art of communication, especially in high-stakes situations, power belongs to the listener. The one who listens holds the control because they hold the information. Every word, every pause, every shift in tone is a piece of the puzzle. The person who speaks reveals. The person who listens collects. Listening isn't just hearing words, it's interpreting behavior. A skilled interrogator understands that every sound, gesture, and expression communicates something beyond language. When someone speaks, they don't just give you answers, they give you emotional data. The words might lie, but the tone won't. The story might twist, but the eyes will tell the truth. People can rehearse what they say, but not what they feel. True listening means tuning into what's not being said, the spaces between the words, the moments when silence says more than speech ever could. The most effective listeners are observers. They're not waiting for their turn to speak. They're watching. They notice how someone sits, how they breathe, how they react when a question hits too close to home. They pick up on patterns. When a person avoids certain topics, when their voice rises slightly, when they use too many details to cover uncertainty, every behavior is a clue. The listener becomes a detective, piecing together truth through attention. Most people fail to listen because they're too focused on themselves. They're preparing their next question, planning their next point, or mentally debating the answer before the other person has even finished speaking. That's not listening, that's performing. When you do that, you miss the micro moments that reveal authenticity. True listening requires stillness, both physical and mental. It's being fully present in the moment, not distracted by what you think should happen next. It's about curiosity, not control. Listening disarms people. When someone realizes you're genuinely paying attention, not just hearing their words, but absorbing them, they start to trust you. They open up more because they feel valued. Human beings are drawn to those who make them feel heard. It's one of the deepest psychological needs we have. When a person feels truly listened to, their defenses lower automatically. They no longer feel like they're in a confrontation. They feel like they're in a conversation. That shift changes everything. The paradox of listening is that it gives you control without appearing to take it. When you speak too much, you expose yourself. You reveal your strategy, your emotions, your expectations. But when you listen, you hold the power silently. The other person doesn't know what you're thinking, and that uncertainty works in your favor. You create a calm space where the other person fills the silence with their thoughts, their fears, their excuses, their truth. You guide the conversation without pushing it. You let them talk themselves into clarity or contradiction. Listening is an active process. It requires discipline and focus. You can't fake it because people can tell when your attention isn't real. They notice when your eyes drift, when your expression goes flat, when your responses are automatic. Real listening means you're studying everything. The rhythm of speech, the emotional undertone, the inconsistencies that don't align. It's not about collecting words. It's about decoding intention. You're not just asking, what did they say? You're asking, why did they say it like that? What are they avoiding? What are they protecting? A powerful listener also knows how to use silence strategically. They don't interrupt when something uncomfortable comes up. They let the silence stretch until the other person feels compelled to fill it. In that moment, they often reveal what they didn't plan to say. It's a subtle psychological pressure, not aggressive, not intimidating, but effective. When someone feels heard, but not rushed, they start to reveal layers they were trying to hide. The listener becomes the mirror reflecting back their truth. Empathy enhances listening. It allows you to hear beyond judgment. When you approach a conversation with empathy, you're not trying to trap someone in their words. You're trying to understand what drives them. You listen to their logic, their emotion, their pain, and their pride. You understand that behind every action is a reason, behind every lie is fear, behind every defense is insecurity. This understanding doesn't excuse behavior, but it explains it. And once you understand, you can navigate it with precision. The strongest listeners also understand that silence communicates strength. It signals control, confidence, and patience. You don't need to prove authority through speech when your presence already commands it. The person across from you senses it, the calm, steady attention that doesn't flinch or react. They start to feel that your silence is more powerful than their words. That's when they begin to reveal themselves in an attempt to regain control of the interaction. It's an instinctive reaction, and a skilled listener uses it wisely. Listening is also about timing, knowing when to speak and when to hold back. A well-timed pause can do more than a dozen questions. It can invite reflection, create tension, or encourage honesty. The listener doesn't rush to respond. They let their silence linger long enough to make the other person think. Often, the best follow-up isn't another question. It's the space that lets the previous answer echo. In that echo, the truth becomes clearer. Listening requires emotional control. You can't listen effectively if you're reacting emotionally to what you hear. Anger, frustration, or bias will distort perception. You must detach enough to stay objective, but remain human enough to understand emotion. That balance allows you to read the full spectrum of communication, logic, emotion, and instinct. You hear the facts, but you also hear the feelings behind them. That's what separates listening for information from listening for truth. The listener's mind is like a radar, constantly scanning, interpreting, absorbing. They catch the details others miss. They notice what's consistent and what's not. They remember subtle patterns that reveal deeper meaning later. Every detail becomes a thread in the larger fabric of truth. And because they've been listening, when they finally choose to speak, their words carry weight. They ask the question that cuts through pretense because they've already gathered everything they need. True listening isn't passive, it's powerful restraint. It's allowing the other person to reveal themselves fully before you make a move. It's using patience as leverage, silence as a tool, and empathy as understanding. It's knowing that the loudest person in the room rarely has the most power. The one who listens does. Because listening gives you insight, and insight is influence. It's how you see beyond words, beyond stories, and into the truth that hides underneath them.